But there's no doubt that that was a consequential thing, not having Franken in the Senate at that time. So I can't bring him up without talking not just about the way he got to the Senate, but the way he left the Senate. And I've said, candidly, that you shouldn't say that about yourself. That's never good when you say, I said candidly. Well, what about the rest of the time? Are you not candid? But I've said, I regret what happened to him because what he was asking for was a hearing. He never got the hearing. I felt like he was collateral damage in pursuit of the Alabama Senate seat because he was an inconvenient problem for Democrats as they were heading into this race against Roy Moore. I think it was unfair. But I want to ask you, because of the position you hold, and you're right there, and the Me Too movement is driving a lot of our politics right now, and driving a lot of candidacies and a lot of energy, and I think in a positive way.
That's right.
But in this case, it feels like it was politics run amok a little bit.
It was such a painful time for everybody involved, and I think that's important to note here. It ended up being a perfect storm that we just nobody could pull him out of, and that is incredibly frustrating. What I will say, he was never going to do anything that wasn't going to help the people of Minnesota, and when it became clearer and clearer, particularly when the senators started calling for his resignation, that he was going to have a hard time doing his work, and he loves Minnesota, and did not want to do anything to hurt or damage the people there. But the moment itself, it's so important that women feel like they can tell their story, and we need to listen, and that's what Me Too is about, right? And thank goodness, because it's been thousands of years where women haven't been listened to at all, right? Absolutely. And they do need to be listened to, and they needed to be taken seriously, and that's really important. We also need to have processes in place to figure out like what should be done and what the ramification of a situation should be. And what the problem, I feel like, was in Congress, and by the way, still is today, is that there's no clear process. Mm-hmm. Like there was no immediate ethics committee hearing. Mm-hmm. There was no immediate conversation about what to do next. There's no HR, human resources department really in these institutions in Congress, and so there's just no one really knew what it was going to happen in a real way. And yes, there's going to be an ethics committee, but it was going to be 6 months later, and that wasn't good enough for that moment. And you're right. Then there was Roy Moore just staring there, like heavy
duty. Well, both
duty.
parties had, the Republican Party had an interest in stringing the Franken thing out. Democratic Party had an interest in cutting it short. The Moore thing was coming down in within days of.
Well, and you had more women coming out.
Right.
Saying they'd had these these not pleasant experiences with the senator who before he was in the Senate, by the way. Right. None of it was during the Senate. And and so it was just an incredibly frustrating moment. The other frustrating part, because I am heartbroken over the whole thing.
The odd thing about it was he apologized, and not that alone was not that's not a pass to get out of what you, but it seemed like he was earnestly trying to address this, and the people who were denying what they had done were getting a pass. Now Roy Moore ultimately didn't get a pass, but you do have still accusers
in the White House.
Yeah, exactly.
To be blunt.
Right, exactly. So I mean,
no, it was awful. But the other thing that was happening though, and I want to speak to this because it was really hard. Particularly the women in the Senate were looked upon as the leaders, like what are we supposed to do? And the press and everybody was on them every single day. And then so there's that, so when you start just building up the pressure, and the pressure's building. And we had, and understandably, particularly young women, it's a generational difference we have found on what should be the punishment. But younger women are like done. They're done. They can't even believe we're dealing with this stuff anymore. Yes. And so you'd walk into your office and look at your fabulous young staff who's working so hard for you, and they're all looking back at you going, why is this guy still here?
Right.
And that was real. And that happens all the time. So this is such a complicated moment, and it's so important for us as we move forward. Like, we've got to get clear processes in place for, whether it's, if we can't get them in place in Congress, what is the waitress at the diner going to do? Like, we have got such gigantic problems across this country with sexual harassment in the workplace. And we got to start dealing with it right in Congress first, and then start putting in, there are things we can do in this country to help women and have these conversations. So we've got to start doing it. And I really hope to see that Congress, and I don't even know why this would be a partisan thing. I don't understand why all of the leaders don't get together and go, there seems to be incidences on both sides. We just got to fix this. Why can't we do that?